Happy holidays and welcome to the Monday Memory Rewind of the very first episode of our Why Complain When You Can Whine podcast. We thank you and appreciate all the support you've shown us this past year, and we look forward to whining with you in 2024. Welcome to Why Complain When You Can Whine, making sense of the senseless. 3 professional women attempting to make sense of the toxic nonsense while drinking wine. I am Dr. Jody Lorman, Psych Dr. J, Jody, any or all of the above. I am a licensed clinical psychologist in the state of California, so I do have to make this disclaimer that anything that we talk about today or on any of our podcasts is for entertainment and some psychoeducational purposes only. There is never any therapeutic relationship given or implied. That being said, just a brief little bit about me. I was in a 10-year narcissistic or relationship with a narcissist, diagnosed MPD, and I am 4 years thriving in my narc-free life. Now, considering this is Why Complain When You Can Whine, I will be remiss if I don't tell you I am drinking Epicurio, and it is some foreign Aguilianico Puglia. If anybody knows what this is, feel free to let me know, because I have no idea how to pronounce this at all. I'm not even sure what it tastes like right yet. And my glass says not a day over fabulous. My sister gave this to me for my birthday. So that is me. Heather.
Hi, I'm Heather. I'm a licensed professional counselor in Denver, Colorado. I'm also a criminal justice clinician, and I am a domestic violence survivor. And I'm drinking, it's a Grenache, I think that's how you pronounce it, called Sister Snake. It's got a pretty snake on it.
Wow.
And my glass today says Hades on it. My friend got it for me. My cat's name is Hades. So
Nice. Love.
yes.
I'm Ashley, and I am an entrepreneur and founder of Loving Single, and I am a domestic violence and SA survivor. I am also a single mom, and tonight I am drinking a local wine from St. Catherine's Vineyard, where I live, the Peach. Oh my God, it's delicious.
My
glass is a classic long stem.
Ooh, it looks so classic.
It's my favorite. It's my favorite wine glass. I do believe I can fit almost an entire bottle of wine in that glass.
That's awesome. Those are the best kind.
I swear I thought you were going to say, I do believe I could fit an entire bottle of wine. Entire bottle of wine in myself in one night, basically.
Yeah, I can. Wow. That too.
We can all do that, I think. But
I think I did that last week, actually.
Yeah. Last week was a long week.
Yes.
Mercury is in retrograde.
I do want to, oh God, don't get me started on that. I do want to say that I have the, I'm going to call it remedial wine glass, because mine is a sippy cup, because I do have a tendency to spill.
Yeah.
So this is for safety reasons around my computer. I have the child sippy cup top, and I'm very proud of that.
Awesome. Yes. So we are doing episode 1 of Why Complain When You Can Whine. And so for episode 1, we are going to start off at square one. What better way to start off at square one than episode 1? So tonight, let's cover cluster B. Let's talk about personality disorders, Dr. Jody and Heather, and let's break it down. Make it make sense. Make it make sense, because we hear all these different personality disorders. We hear about narcissists, borderline, and what are all the personalities inside of cluster B? Let's talk about it.
To start with, I do want to say that although there's 4 separate cluster Bs, each one can possibly have traits and tendencies of all the other ones. So you might hear about or see someone and go, but they also do this and that. They have a lot of commonalities. They really do. So it is not uncommon for someone who has one cluster B personality disorder to have a lot of traits of another one. If somebody has enough traits and tendencies to make it diagnosable, then they can have more than one cluster B personality disorder. So you're not just stuck by that one. So let's start with, I'm going to just say briefly what the personality disorder is, and then we can talk about like some examples or something to make it understandable or relatable to things that you might know or see. The first one is antisocial personality disorder. Now, I worked in prison for 13 years, men's maximum security prison. Heather's works in criminal justice. So there is a lot of cluster B period in prison, but of antisocial personality disorder, it is a pervasive pattern of disregard for and violation of the rights of others. That is just like the brief part, and then it's all about how those behaviors manifest. But someone with antisocial personality disorder is somebody, for example, we were talking about this before, if you ever watch Sons of Anarchy, that would be somebody with antisocial personality disorder. It usually starts, let's edit this part out. Sorry, guys. Let me start back with all personality disorders are diagnosed at the age of 18 or after, except antisocial personality disorder. Antisocial personality disorder more often starts before the age of 15 as conduct disorder. And that is somebody who has gotten into trouble over and over and over again because they just don't care. Oftentimes they may harm animals and people. They have just a blatant disregard for authority in general. So if you see kids that are just like, for lack of a better description, bad seeds, you might call them, that might be antisocial. That might be conduct disorder, which turns into antisocial personality disorder at the age of 18. What's really popular right now is Jeffrey Dahmer with the Dahmer series.
Mm-hmm. Although he is not diagnosed antisocial, he has, like she said earlier, they do have some traits of others, but he's diagnosed with borderline and schizotypal personality disorders. And we're not going to talk about that cluster of personality disorders and explain all of that because that would take all night. But yeah, he's got two. But
it's somebody who has, well, the thing with Dahmer doesn't have a long rap sheet because he just evaded getting into trouble, got very lucky by doing that. But typically someone with antisocial personality has a very long rap sheet. And what I mean by rap sheet, I think we all know what that is, of criminal behavior repeated over and over and over, vandalism, graffiti. Even graffiti is vandalism. So they have a reckless disregard for themselves. They have a reckless disregard for others. Really
impulsive, risk-taking behavior. I mean, if we circle back to Sons of Anarchy, like they really have no loyalty to anyone but themselves. But like, if you look at Sons of Anarchy, or you look at like gang members in general, that, you know, those who have antisocial personality disorder can have some loyalty to their own, but even then they'll kill their own mom, right? So so they claim loyalty and respect as a value system of theirs, but it's a twisted value system that's very against social norms, which is why they call it anti-social, because it's like anti-society, not antisocial in the way that some people think, which is asocial actually.
Yeah, well, and that was something I was going to ask for you to clarify, because when I hear antisocial personality disorder, I just think, oh, they're not social. They're like introverted. But no, that's not it at all.
No. I did a video of when people say the psychologists urge to correct people when they say antisocial when they mean asocial. Asocial is I am just not wanting to be social. Like I'm more introverted, or you can even be asocial for a period of time, not like totally asocial all the time.
Jeffrey Dahmer, asocial,
Asocial.
not antisocial.
And antisocial is because I'll say, are you really antisocial? You might want to think about that. Like when we think about psychopath and sociopath. Psychopaths and sociopaths, would you say, Heather? Antisocial right there.
Yeah, they're kind of like the subcategories of antisocial personality disorder, the sociopaths and psychopaths. Psychopaths are like the really dangerous predator types in that personality disorder, and sociopaths are more the ones that they can get along with others better. They're not as predatory, but they will definitely use and manipulate people to get their needs met. So
an antisocial, just to break it down even further, an antisocial personality disorder, fucking Mercury. Fuck Mercury retrograde. So antisocial personality disorder, like you really have to think about that when you say it. Jeez Louise. It's mostly a person who has zero regard for rules, standards, boundaries, has no compliance to any of them, but also has a complete disregard for authority. Correct?
Right.
That's
Hatred of authority.
Because like when you look at narcissists who have a complete disregard for all of that too, but not to authority, and they'll follow rules and norms and stuff, whereas borderline, they don't. They're a lot of times criminals. That's an easier way to say that. They're criminals.
Antisocial. Yeah.
Yeah, are going to be
borderline.
Oh, I did. I'm so sorry. Thank you for correcting me.
It's Mercury. We're all.
It is because I didn't even hear it. So yeah, antisocials are going to be you when you're thinking criminal, you think antisocial. When you think antisocial, you think criminal. That's kind of almost like the easiest way to remember it. And I look at sociopaths as they're sociopaths and psychopaths. Sociopaths are charming, cunning. You go toward them, they fit in with society, and then they will kill you. Whereas psychopaths are the kinds that you run away from, and then they kill you.
Okay, so let's talk about that since you're talking about that. So an antisocial is going to be, because this is, and then I think after this would be a good idea to move into borderline, because borderline and antisocial are so, it's almost so gray between the two of them, at least for my basic understanding. At least what I know of both of them. Also because I think my ex has both of them. He's like very in the middle. Antisocial would be to describe a personality type, or I hate to generalize, but it would be the bad boy.
Yeah.
Worse than the bad boy. The bad boy magnified. The bad boy who has already gotten in trouble for being a bad boy numerous times.
Well, and I think, and the reason I say that is because I, for the longest time, was attracted to the bad boy. The bad boy, as far as like, where nowadays when I see, even if you wear your hat a certain way, I'm like, oh, hell no. I already know who you hang with, just based on my ex. But it's the gang type, where as far as I know that overlaps sometimes with BPD, but when we can go into that in a minute. But so as far as like a personality, it's the bad boy type to an extreme.
Yeah, because there's bad boys who, for lack of a better description, are just bad boys in the whole, they're risk takers. And then there's bad boys in you have a record, and you have a juvenile record, and you're on parole or probation. Now that doesn't in and of itself make them a bad boy, but that's the ASPD bad boy type is going to be someone who just keeps getting into trouble with the law and doesn't give a shit either.
Right.
Yeah.
They end up being pretty institutionalized. Like if you look at a max, and someone's going to check this statistic for me, but the last statistic I heard a couple years ago, maybe more than a couple of years ago, was that in a max security prison setting, about like a large percentage, something like 75-80% of them would meet criteria for antisocial personality disorder. So max security prison being like your very high risk, repeat offender, people that aren't getting out anytime soon, usually, right? Are just so like a high percentage of those meet criteria for antisocial personality disorder. And then 20-ish% of them meet criteria for psychopathy, that are like full-blown predators, animals that need to be in cages forever. So really dangerous people.
I did look this up because I did a video on it on TikTok, because I worked in maximum security. And the thing is, in mental health, we didn't get a lot of ASPD because they didn't go to mental health, but we got a lot more of borderline, or we saw a lot more borderline. But there's about 47% of people currently incarcerated have ASPD, some ASPD present. And in some studies, the prevalence reaches as high as 78%. So
I was close. I was in there somewhere, but
Yeah.
it's so these are really dangerous people. These aren't just like the bad boys that we're attracted to, that are just kind of rebels and things like that, because they're even I have like a rebellious tendency, right? Even I have like a kind of like an anti-authority attitude sometimes, right? But these people, when it comes to having a personality disorder, you're taking these kinds of traits that some of us have already, and you're blowing them up times 1,000 into really problematic relational skills, problematic views, and criminal thinking errors, and just the inability to function in the world as they are as humans, which is actually a pretty devastating thing when you think about it. Because if I was in the world and I was just unable to get along in the world as it is because of a disorder like that, it's pretty devastating to have to live with something like that. So they don't fucking care that they have to live like this. Like other personality disorders and the other clusters really have a fucking hard time with this stuff, like the avoidant, the schizotypal. Like these guys and girls have a really hard time just living as themselves, which is pretty devastating. But the sociopaths are dangerous.
I do think we have to, and I should have said this in the beginning, personality disorders, the thing with personality disorders of all the clusters is the person typically does not think there's anything wrong with them. It is the people around them that are affected. They will have issues in social, emotional, and occupational functioning, but they think it is everybody else's fault or everybody else's problem. So that is the one thing with personality disorders that you will see, like going into, just really quickly, other clusters. Like there's obsessive compulsive personality disorder. That's not obsessive compulsive disorder. It's obsessive compulsive personality disorder, where that person has to have everything has to be level and neat and clean, but it doesn't bother them. It doesn't bother them because that's who they are. But everyone around them is like, can you stop? So with personality disorders and with OCD, it affects and causes them distress. So personality disorders do not typically cause the person distress. They cause everybody around them some kind of issue, problem, distress, whatever. So I think I think it's important to make that part clear, that most people with personalities don't give.
Yeah. Well, and I've noticed that with my ex, and that was something I was going to say, is that within the realm of ASPD, I think it's important for the listeners to understand that, like, I mean, if you look at my quote unquote rap sheet of men I've dated, they were all, and when I say bad boys, they all have a record. They all have a record.
Same.
And they all have a criminal record, and they're all sexy as fuck, and they're all attractive, and they're all charismatic, and they're all charming, and they're all badasses. And to a degree, I was attracted to that until I found out, oh shit,
They're dangerous.
you're now that I'm not your favorite anymore, you're dangerous to me, not just everyone else. So I
That's
think
the loyalty piece. That's the like they could be loyal to their own, but
Yeah.
they'll still kill you. They'll
for
still kill you.
without a drop, without a
Like if you watch Sons of Anarchy, spoiler alert, but it's only been what, 10 years. So it shouldn't be a spoiler alert at this point. But in Sons of Anarchy, he kills his mom.
They will
And
still
he
kill
kind
you.
of
They will be.
expects it, you know?
I mean, like, listen, for real, my ex robbed his mother and his grandmother at gunpoint, and then was like, what? I didn't do anything wrong.
Yes, that's
Literally like that.
thinking.
Yeah, like literally, he was like, that bitch told me this. And that's exactly what he said. That bitch did this. She deserved it. His mother.
Yep.
His mother.
Yes, absolutely.
His grandmother, who was like 80 years old at the time. No sympathy, no remorse, was just like, what? I didn't do anything wrong. Like, she was asking for it.
Yeah, no empathy. The empathy is in the tank, and the thinking is criminal. Like absolute criminal thinking. Everything is justified that they do. The outlaw kind of thinking, like they are on one side, it's us against them. Very black and white. Really, they minimize their behavior. They rationalize the shit out of it. That it's all like justified to them the way they think. They don't understand why we would give a fuck about that, because it makes sense to them why they would, rob their own mother and grandmother because of their bad behavior towards them. And you know what? If someone were to do the same to them, they would understand it. It's just how that's just how they are. But because they're so fucking dangerous, they end up in cages and prisons and jails and doing that stuff to each other, and then just feeding on that. So that kind of mentality is really difficult to change and break. And for people who don't even meet criteria for antisocial personality disorder that end up in the prison system, they can be sort of brainwashed into some of that thinking too and institutionalized into it. So it's really, that thinking structure is pretty fucking delusional, because it's not the way society was set up. But oh man, can they explain to you why it makes sense to them?
So my ex would literally say to me, it's the principle. It's the principle, actually. And it's the principle of it, which is why I'm going to inflict as much pain as possible on this person, because it's the principle of the matter. And so no matter what, how wrong it is, their actions are, my ex could justify horrible acts.
Because that's their code of ethics.
Oh my
God.
God.
Their code of ethics is
There
not
is no code.
The code of ethics that we follow. Their code of ethics is, you don't fucking cross me and we're good.
And my ex would say to me, because he had a 20 cycle criminal history by the time he got put in prison again. And 20 cycles, meaning he had 20 arrest cycles prior to this. And like he said to me once, because I was like, that person on the outside looking in going, hey, the problem is you. Like the common denominator in all of these issues is you. And he looked at me, and I will never forget this because it totally caused like some crazy cognitive dissonance for me. He looked at me and he said, why should I have to change?
Yep.
Yeah.
And I was like, and I almost struggled answering that question, because it was like, damn, bitch, you're sitting here with this person that you love, that you've like committed your life to at this point, and you're asking him to change all of his ways and all of his thinking that he doesn't see a fucking issue with. And it doesn't seem to be causing him any distress. And so he's looking at you, asking you, why should I have to change? Why can't you all out here change and accept me for who I am? What the fuck is wrong with you and the way you're thinking? And it's like, at some point you're like, oh my God, is my thinking wrong? Like, are they right? And you're like,
that's the thing with these, but that's the thing with cluster Bs, is they're going to make you either
totally gaslight you.
they're going to make you question your own sanity and your own ethics and all of that. And when we get into histrionic, I'll tell you about that one, but you want to do borderline first.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think, I don't know if we can get all of them in. Maybe it might take but I think that, at least what I know of, but you two know more. I think that antisocial personality disorder and BPD, at least what I've seen, they're very, I feel like when I've looked at the statistics and what I've heard from both of you and what I've learned from both of you is that those are the two most common denominators inside of prison.
Yeah. Mental health sees borderline personality disorder in prison and jail settings a lot. Because if they are getting in trouble, it's because they have become so dysregulated. And so there's usually a mental health crisis that kind of brings them into the criminal justice system rather than just a repeated pattern of criminal behavior because they don't give a fuck about anybody else. Like, I think, and I don't know if Jody agrees or not, but that's what I see. I see borderline, that a lot of them end up with they have other mental health issues, they have substance abuse issues, and they come into the jail system pretty in a lot of like disarray and distress because they don't have any distress tolerance anyway. So they come into the system in that fashion, and then they have contact with mental health. Whereas the people with ASPD, I see ASPD a lot because they're court mandated to see me. If they're already inside, they don't seek out mental health because they really don't give a shit about that. The only reason they want to seek out mental health in jail and prison is if they're trying to get gabapentin, Seroquel, or some Wellbutrin. They could sell them.
I'll tell you about that. But borderline personality is more of a pervasive pattern of instability in interpersonal relationships, self-image and affect, and marked impulsivity. A lot of it stems from abandonment and fear of abandonment. And so what they do is they're so afraid that you're going to abandon them that they sabotage it and push you away. They self-sabotage a lot. I look at, like I said earlier, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. She was diagnosed in the show as borderline. In the very first season, and only the very first season of 13 Reasons Why, the main character who it's all about her because she killed herself and then sent tapes to 13 of people explaining why she did it. And only in the first season, though, she has very borderline behavior. And for example, she was apparently SA. Now, you don't know what that SA was. They don't talk about it until really later on in the second season. In the first season, all they talk about was a guy that she went out with that took pictures of her skirt and stuff like that. So this guy really likes her. They start messing around at a party. And he's like, are you okay with this? And she's like, yes, 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 I want this, I want this. And he's like, are you sure? Yes, yes, yes. He goes to take off her shirt and she pushes him away hard and fast and says, get the fuck away from me. And he's like, what? And she's like, get the fuck away from me now. And he's like, okay. And he puts on his clothes and he runs away. He runs out the door. And the narration over that, this is what makes it BPD. The narration over that was, why did you leave me? Why did you go? And it's like, well, bitch, because he's 17 and you fucking just told him to leave. He didn't know what to do. Right. In another scene, and these are just trying to explain what BPD is. In another scene, she goes in to see the counselor at the school. And apparently she was raped. They don't talk about it. She sits down, his wife, the counselor's wife is blowing him up on the phone, just had a baby, blowing him up, and he keeps hanging up on her because he's trying to talk to the girl. And he's like, look, I can't help you unless you tell me why you're here. He knew, but unless she says something, he can't. And she's like, I can't tell you. And he's like, you need to tell me, I can't do anything. And they went back and forth with this for a few times. And meanwhile, his phone's blowing up. He puts it in his desk drawer and he's like, look, I want to help you. And she goes, you don't understand. And she leaves. She takes her backpack and she leaves. So he takes his phone and probably gets bitched at by his wife. in the narration overlay, she's like, why didn't you run after me? Why didn't you come get me? I wanted you to. And it's like, seriously, it is the leave me the fuck alone, but come help me. I'm going to
Wishful.
push your ass away. Why did you go? You don't love me, even though I sent you away.
So BPD is in an abandonment. I mean, does it start with an abandonment? Because that's what
yeah.
I hear is this. And honestly, this is gonna, I hate to be this transparent. I fucking do. It's, I can relate personally with my childhood trauma. I can relate to that to a degree of why won't, like, doing something almost as a, when I think back to my trauma, almost as a test, like, if I run, will you come for me?
Mhm.
If I tell you to go away, are you going to fight for me? I remember being in my trauma after SA and after childhood, after CSA, like I remember being like, why won't you? Why, if I push, why won't you come and hold me?
Yeah.
Is that where it starts?
Okay. So here, so borderline isn't caused by trauma, but trauma could definitely be a part of it in early childhood. It really, like, if the way I differentiate like antisocial personality disorder from borderline personality disorder is by early attachment styles. And so a borderline personality disordered person has some really unresolved abandonment issue stuff from early childhood. And then I look at antisocial personality disorder as someone who has not gotten their needs met in childhood and doesn't believe that anyone will meet their needs unless they get them to meet their needs themselves, unless they manipulate them into meeting their needs. That's how I kind of how I look at it. And then I look at it like borderline is, I also don't believe you're ever going to meet my needs. So I'm going to push you away. But then I absolutely hate this intense fear of abandonment. So I pull you forward. So I look at it in like which direction the arrow is going. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I'm more of a biopsychosocial, and I believe that antisocial personality disorder, a lot of it is faulty wiring. I believe a lot of it
biopsychosocial, but to answer Ashley's question, I think it's like, is it trauma? It's like, it's a little bit of like everything, but
I don't
think
even know
everyone
what
can
that means.
relate.
What biopsychosocial is, there's a biological genetic component, biological and or genetic.
Mercury.
So in the womb, as you're developing component to it, and an environmental component to it, and a social component. So a biological, a psychological, and a social component.
Okay.
So whenever we look at mental health, well, not everybody does, but certain orientations, certain clinicians, which everybody should, but again, you got different orientations in psychology, but you should look at the biological factors, the psychological factors, and the social factors. And to me, with antisocial personality disorder, you can typically, that's why it starts before age 15. You can typically see signs. There have been kids as young as 2 showing signs, that have harmed their siblings, harmed animals, done things that you're like, oh shit. So I look at a lot of faulty wiring more so than you could be the best nurturing parent in the world. And a lot of times you're gonna sadly have a sociopath or psychopath without there being any quote unquote trauma that you've seen.
So does that also apply to BPD the way it does with ASPD?
Well, put it this way. If we look at anything, like you can have a predisposition for diabetes, you can have a predisposition for high blood pressure, you can have a predisposition for heart disease, and you could do everything right with your diet, with everything, and still get it. Or you could do everything wrong and not get it. So you can have a predisposition for BPD or NPD or HPD, histrionic personality disorder, and just the factors because you could have two twins, two siblings who went through the same childhood, but it's also the perception of the childhood. Like, I can't tell you what trauma is. I can't say, Ashley, you didn't have a traumatic childhood. If you felt that you did, that's what it takes. So if you felt that there was, and I'm not saying you did or didn't have trauma, but if it's perceived trauma, that is going to affect, again, our brains are developing and forming. And so it's how we're looking at the world also. However, it's wired when we come out. We can have birth defects of a hole in our heart. We can have birth defects of our intestines on the outside. We could be missing limbs or malformed hands. Same thing can happen with our brain.
So there is the potential of, for anyone who's a parent and is listening, or just someone who's questioning their own mental health and whether or not they have a personality disorder. There is the potential that they were just born that way.
And all the factors in their developmental history clicked.
Yep.
And honestly, people with personality disorders, in my opinion, don't question whether they have a personality disorder.
Right,
It's everything around them that questions.
It's everyone else. There's a cumulative thing that's happening, right? Like, it's not just like Jody said, it's not just like a traumatic experience and then, oh my gosh, you're screwed. Like, you can have a traumatic experience that triggers what you were already genetically predisposed to having, plus, society and having just a lack of whatever social support or other cultural factors that play into things. And then this cumulative stuff starts building up throughout your entire life. And that's why we're not diagnosing this until after you're 18, right? Because you're still cumulatively developing your fucking identity during these times too, right? So your personality is, your identity, right? So you're like building up to this who you are person, and all of these other factors are coming in at the same time. And when it becomes abnormal, when it becomes a disorder, it's because it's extremely, extremely impacting your life and the life of everyone around you. And you don't have the psychological ability to have insight into that. So whereas you and Jody and me and other people have the ability to sit there and go, well, fuck, like, I meet criteria for fucking everything, like we all have personality traits that fit into these categories. But when it becomes a disorder, when someone has a personality disorder around you, because these people, you cannot sustain relationships with the people with personality disorders. They are very, very difficult to navigate relationally with, and it's because they have developed into something that's abnormal, that's dysfunctional. Most of we have personality stuff that we're like, I got to work on this, or I have a faulty feature over here, or a trait that I probably should change about myself, but it's not really gonna fucking kill anybody if I don't. Like, these people are hurting people around them a lot of the time. Cluster B, a lot of the time, are hurting a lot of people around them without having any insight into it. And I am done with fucking Mercury today. So Jody, go for it.
That's the thing, like, you'll see, and when we get to NPD, which I think is going to be, we'll do HPD next, and then we'll do NPD in a totally separate one and go from there, I think, because NPD is so wonderful. But
NPD is our expertise at this point.
God. Make fucking sense for Mercury retrograde. It's not working. But we can all have traits and tendencies, and you will see that there are some very high-powered people with NPD.
There's psychopaths doing surgery for you people out there. Just saying.
Yeah, and
they're functioning.
There are some very CEOs, people in high positions, and they got there because they didn't give a fuck about the people they had to fuck over to get
there. They
there.
stepped on to get there, right? Yep. They're hurting people around them, sometimes to their benefit and yours in the end, because they're able to run your companies and be your lawyers. And I'm not generalizing lawyers as personality disordered. I'm not. Don't come after me. Fuck.
So really quickly, so in cluster B, we have ASPD, we have BPD, then we have histrionic personality disorder, which is HPD.
HPD.
Mercury.
Mercury. And
You
then
gotta
we
put a
have-
disclaimer in the very beginning of this is saying, this was recorded during Mercury retrograde.
We are all off right now.
And then, well, and I think the wine helps.
No, I
And
think
then-
it helps, not hurts. I think we'd be far worse without the wine.
So we have ASPD, antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, BPD, histrionic personality disorder, and narcissistic personality disorder. So are those the generalized cluster Bs? Are there any
Yes.
other cluster Bs?
That's cluster B. right there.
Okay, so when we talk about borderline and ASPD, what is a really good, I know we talked about 13
Reasons why.
reasons why. Is there a good celebrity that we can kind of look at as far as BPD goes? Because I know you mentioned Sons of Anarchy for ASPD, but is there someone that we can look to and be like, oh, gotcha?
Well, okay,
I love-
Amber Heard was diagnosed with HPD and BPD.
and BPD, but I like her as the histrionic example.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I love Crazy Ex-Girlfriend's character. It's
Mhm.
it's a comedy musical on Netflix, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. It's if you hate musicals, you'll hate it, but if you're okay with
So,
musicals, you'll love it.
but it's not just musicals. It's no, they talk about vagina musical. They have musicals about vaginas. They have musicals about boobs. They have musicals about.
I love Crazy
Jesus.
Ex-Girlfriend. It's one of my
So good.
favorite shows ever.
Yeah.
And she is a really good example of borderline personality disorder, but it's kind of a light-hearted example of borderline. So but you can see how in the beginning of the show, she really struggles to know what the fuck is going on with her. There's really low distress tolerance with borderline personality disorder. And so she's actually going for mental health treatment a lot, going like, what the F is wrong with me? And she's had suicide attempts, growing up. She's on multiple medications that they're trying for anxiety, for depression. None of them are working. No one can figure out what's going on with her. And she has this really pervasive pattern of like relationship issues, just dysfunctional relationships. And it's done in like a lighthearted way, like funny way in the show, until like 3 seasons in or 4 seasons in, when she's really having a hard time in life, like really a lot of distress, really like and her relationship with her psychiatrist is adorable, the way they're working it out. And she finally gets the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. She fucking Googles it, even though her psychiatrist tells her not to. And there's all this information about how hard it is to treat and how long-term treatment is. And so it's really devastating for her to get that diagnosis. And,
but she
at the
walks
same
around
time,
with all
she's
her
really-
workbooks. She's got all her workbooks and stuff.
got all her workbooks.
Yeah.
And by the end of the show, it's like a really nice, lighthearted way to look at something that is a very, I think, painful disorder for people to have. Like for the cluster Bs, for the other cluster Bs who don't really think they have a problem, borderline really, really is in a lot of distress and can't figure out what the fuck is going on. So they do have a lot of contact with mental health, and they are in crisis centers and hospitals all the time with multiple suicide attempts a lot, and just really, 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 really suffering individuals. And so and lots of, and they end up, some of them with substance use disorders and things like that, for self-medicating some of this stuff. And so I have a hard time working with borderline personality disorder because it's not my expertise. I have a colleague on my criminal justice team that she gets all the borderline referrals, and I get all the ASPD referrals because I work better with them than she does, and vice versa. So she is so brilliant at DBT and these treatments, and treating borderline personality disorder. I have a big, softer heart for borderline personality disorder, but they are very difficult because they have relational issues with people that are that are just damaging and really, really hard to deal with. And so, but I really have a big heart for borderline, and Crazy Ex-Girlfriend will create empathy for borderline for people if they don't have it. I have a lot of empathy for borderline. I just have a hard time treating it because it's not fun for me.
I'm not different. It's not that I don't have empathy. I will say that borderlines, the ones that I've worked with, which I don't like working with them. I had a borderline couple before. That was so much fun. But borderlines are the kind that once you like the little hairs on the back of your neck stand up when you're dealing with borderlines. But once they know, a lot of borderlines, honestly, I will say, once they find out, they do want to change. NPD, absolutely not, but borderlines. But the problem is, it is work. It is forever for the rest of your life work. It's not
Fucking
just
hard.
like a depression that can go into remission and you never have it again. It is a lot of work. And so it's hard. So you'll have people with borderline that are doing really well and then just like fucking lose it. We saw borderlines in prison a lot of times with the crisis calls. The crisis calls because they were going suicidal because they didn't get whatever it was that they wanted, whatever it was. Somebody was
splitting. Boom, you're all evil now.
Wasn't good to them. And the sad thing was, and I'm not the only one that thinks this, the vast majority, I think, of the suicides that we had in prison were borderlines doing the, oh, really? You're not going to listen to me? I'm going to show you that I'm serious.
Yep.
And did not expect and were not really wanting to die. I had a guy on my caseload who said that he hung himself, or attempted, I should say. And
me too. And I'm hang attempts with borderline.
I have a lot of them. But we were talking and I said, tell me about it. And he said, well, I knew the officer was going to come by at 2:01. So I hung the noose over at 2. And at 2:01, when I heard the footsteps, that's when I went to hang myself. And I said, now, I'm sorry.
What
I said, well, I'm sorry.
Mercury.
Mercury.
Go ahead and
every time Mercury happens, I take a drink.
But I had said to him, he goes, I knew they were going to come. And I said, well, what would have happened if there was an alarm and they suddenly had to go respond to it? Then what? And he said, oh, I didn't even think about that. I didn't think about it. See, that's the problem, is they don't think about the consequences. No, it's like, I'm going to push you away thinking that you'll come back. And then when you don't, like, wait, what? Wait, how did you not come back? That wasn't in their plan.
So my ex, after I eventually left and he was like, oh shit, she left. One of the tactics that he would use on the regular was, if you don't, I'm going to kill myself.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's what they do in prison all the time.
And so
that's a cluster B generalized kind of manipulation.
And I was going to say, we can, I think, in our next episode, it would be great to talk about histrionic and NPD.
Yes.
Absolutely. But that's, I find a lot of people saying, oh, my narcissist, he always does this. But I noticed my ex, it was always going back to suicide. And it was, with me, the moment he would say things like that, I came running.
Yeah. Of course, because you're a human fucking being with empathy.
I know.
Right? Yeah.
And so I wanted to make that delineation, because there's going to be some people that are listening to this and like, oh my God, my ex.
So here's what I recommend people do in relationships like this with borderline personality disorder. My best friend had borderline personality disorder, my best friend of 20 years, and we are no longer. I was good at keeping really thick boundaries with her and navigating that friendship until the end, and then it had to be an ended friendship because she just never got help. And but she had 4 suicide attempts in 1 year. So here's what I recommend people do. If people, always take threats of suicide fucking seriously, right? Don't just be like, oh, you're fucking borderline and you're just bullshitting me and trying to manipulate me back. All threats of suicide should be taken very seriously. I wouldn't recommend just like going and running to them and trying to be the one that saves them all the time. There are crisis services and resources set up, and there's 911 for a reason. So I would call 911 on my best friend all the time. She would be standing on a bridge, threatening to jump off into highway traffic. She would be, she took a selfie of herself hanging by a noose once. She did lots of really melodramatic things. And while I knew it was borderline related, I still responded to them appropriately. 911, go respond, hospitalize her. Would she get out, and not be suicidal that day and still get out of the hospital? Yes. Is that frustrating? Yes. But I always respond to a suicide threat with emergency services. And don't feel like you have to be the one to talk someone down from that ever.
That's why in prison, oh my God, the vast majority of our crisis calls were that. And then when we'd clear them and send them back, half hour later, get another call from the same thing. It's like, I'm not getting my needs wet. What are your needs? We can't meet those needs. This is what we can do. And it was really hard because yes, we have to take every single claim seriously.
Always do that, because suicide's a fucking problem right now. I mean, we've got some pretty high suicide rates and shit right now anyway. And
even if it's a cry for help, to be honest, like with these guys in prison, it's I'm not getting my needs met. This is what I need. It's a cry for attention, and they don't necessarily want it to be a permanent solution. They don't want to die, but they went so far that when you hang yourself, there is a point where you are cognitively aware that holy shit, you're done. And you try to get unwrapped, but physically you don't have the strength to do it because you're lacking oxygen and stuff. So you don't want it. There's a documentary called The Bridge, and it's about all the people in a year that jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge.
Golden Gate, I remember.
Yep, and they filmed everything, and then they talked to some of there were survivors, 19 of them, and every one of every single survivor said something to the effect of, when they let go, oh shit, what did I do?
Yep.
So if every single survivor did it, can you imagine? Probably 9/10 of the people that actually succeeded did it as well. And I hate to use the word succeeded, but died by suicide as well. So
people who die can't recover. As hardcore as a recovery from borderline personality disorder would be, as lifelong as that treatment is, if you are dead, you can't recover. If you are dead, you can't recover from an overdose either. That's why I know people, I'm not going to get into the substance use harm reduction thing, but people like emergency services gets really tired of administering Narcan to the same person over and over again. But dead people can't recover. So always respond with emergency services or crisis services. I know it's frustrating, and have really good emotional boundaries with people with borderline personality disorder, because they're not
your responsibility to save someone. It is not. And that's a really hard thing. And when people put that on people,
it's really traumatizing. I had putting that woman in the hospital 4 times in 1 year was devastating for me to do.
But and while she would have killed herself.
Me a snitch. Yeah, she's screaming at me, calling me a snitch and a rat for calling on her, because I betrayed her and abandoned her by getting her help. It's like so awful to watch someone you care about be that way.
But it's also not your responsibility once you've called emergency services, once you've done what you can do. If they go off and do something, like there was somebody who said their borderline or whatever significant other said, well, they were fighting and they kept throwing me, if you leave, I'll kill myself. And one day they got in a fight, and then that person went to a bar, drunk drove, got in an accident and died.
Yeah.
And it's like left the other person with the, oh my God, that's my fault because we were fighting. And they said, if you do this, I will do that. And that's my fault. It is not your fault.
No.
It's not your responsibility. And that is a really fucked up thing that they do, is put that on you as the burden that you have to carry. Because it's easier to put it on you than for them.
We end up needing therapy for the people who didn't get therapy a lot of times, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, I mean, cause it's so traumatizing. And,
Yeah.
I mean, cause I've received a couple phone calls. I mean, from even friends of mine who have called me and said, you know, even my dad was suicidal for a moment, but he was serious about it. He wasn't threatening it. And so for anyone who's gotten those phone calls, you know, I had a best friend that called me while she was sitting and almost about to. And for the person who's receiving that phone call, it's so traumatizing. I mean, I remember that fucked me up for weeks. I would dream about receiving those phone calls. I would have nightmares that I didn't get to the phone in time. Like, you know, so I think
Yes.
an important message to say, because I can't tell you how many times I've heard from people that, oh my God, they're always threatening suicide. What do I do with it? And then they feel this burden that it's their responsibility to save them, and it's their responsibility to run to them. And so I think that it's a really good kind of plan to tell people that if someone is threatening suicide, you need to call 911.
Yeah.
Yep.
Call 911. Not your job to run to them. It's not safe for you. It's not safe for them to go there. You need to call 911.
And law enforcement has I was a co-responder for 2 years with law enforcement, and most, at least in Colorado, I think every jurisdiction in Colorado, including yours, Ashley, every jurisdiction in Colorado has a co-responder program with law enforcement. So mental health clinicians will respond to those calls. So if you call 911 and a law enforcement dispatcher answers and you're like, this person is suicidal, they will send out not only a law enforcement police officer, they will send out a mental health co-responder with them a lot of times too, to respond to those calls. Cause I did that for 2 years. So
that's what everybody should be doing. A lot of places don't do that.
Yeah, I think it's becoming the new norm very, very rapidly. Co-responder programs in every jurisdiction, and mental health crisis intervention training for law enforcement and mental health training for law enforcement is becoming required instead of voluntold. It's becoming 100% of your officers are going to have crisis intervention training, and you're going to have a co-responder mental health professional responding to your overdoses, your suicidal calls, your psychotic people, all of that. And I did that for 2 years. I'm telling you, there's nothing fucking like that job. It was an intensely rewarding experience, and also intensely, you very much have to take care of yourself, is all I'm going to say, because you were responding. A lot of times clinicians are getting clients after they've already been medicated or de-escalated. When you're responding to them first responder in the moment, when they're in super crisis, it requires a whole other level of skills. And there was just nothing like that work. It was super rewarding. But back to what I was talking about, if you have someone, know that mental health professionals have infiltrated your law enforcement and will respond to these people too. So it's not just cops showing up. A lot of people have had negative interactions with law enforcement, so I get that. But now your mental health people have infiltrated them, and that some of them aren't happy about it. I don't care. We're there, and we're going to respond to some of these calls for you. So please, please, please call 911 if someone says they're suicidal.
But I will also say that is not everywhere, unfortunately, and some places are still fighting that. And instead of sending, they will send out. I mean, I've heard too many horror stories and seen too many horror stories of people that were suicidal.
Demand it.
Yeah.
Start demanding it when you call 911. Say, if you have a mental health co-responder, if you have a crisis intervention team trained officer, if you have
there are
demand it.
places, unfortunately, there are places that honestly, that don't. So you have to look, and if you have the time, do it now. Look up the mobile response teams in your area, because there are psychiatric mobile response teams that you can also call. Like, I know LA County has a psychiatric mobile response number that you can call instead of 911. It's a 24-hour number, and they'll send a psychiatric team out, because there are a lot of places, and I'm sure that if we have a comment section, we'll hear about it. And after people listen to this, saying not in my state, not in my state, because I have talked to a lot of people that are like, I will never call 911 again because this happened and that happened. So if you don't feel safe to call 911, and if it's not in your area, go online and look up psychiatric mobile response or any kind of psychiatric emergency response, anything like that. And there's typically an 800 number in your area for that specifically. And if there isn't, then call 911.
Now,
But-
go ahead, Jody. I'm
No,
sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Now, didn't they just launch, I can't remember the date specifically, 988, which is
988, absolutely. That is nationwide. That not Mercury. That is that is nationwide. It is not just the National Suicide Hotline, it is the crisis hotline as well. So it's not just if you're suicidal. If somebody is in a crisis as well, then call 988.
Yep.
So-
We are not responsible for saving everybody. People, please
No.
call if someone, because take them all seriously. You don't know. It's may not be borderline personality disorder. They may have, it's not none of it's attention seeking to me when it comes to suicide. For me,
even if it's a call for help, I mean, it's a call for help.
yeah,
There's a reason why they're doing what they're doing. They may not be suicidal, but they need help. And that is the only way they feel that they can get it. I have talked to enough clients. I had a client who OD'd on Tylenol, and then she went in front of her parents' bedroom door, so they would literally trip over her and find her that way. And she did it because they weren't listening any other way. Sadly, I had a guy, I worked at Department of Social Services, and I worked at a community assessment service center, and right across the way was Department of Social Services, and they had no psychologist or psychiatrist. And there was a guy in their lobby that took in their lobby a thing of Tylenol PMs to kill himself. And they called me over, and we were talking and waiting for the fire department. And when the fire department came, the guy was like, "Weren't you in our lobby 2 weeks ago?" And I said to the guy, "You need help, you need services." And I left him with some resources when they took him away. Whether he used them or not, I don't know. But even if you think these people are faking, they could be dead.
Yeah.
They could fake to be dead. So always err on the side of caution, because if they are crying out for attention, why? Why? Yeah, there's obviously some reason that they want it and need it. You know, there's something going on, and this is the only way they know how. So take every single, I call it a threat. I don't know what, suicidal ideation, whatever you want to call it, seriously, because that is not something you can come back from.
Yeah.
That is not a mistake you can make more than once.
Yeah. When I got to the point with my ex, where I finally realized that it's not my responsibility to keep them alive. It's not my responsibility to save them. It is my responsibility, first and foremost, to keep myself safe, but also to respond in a manner that, how do I say this? Offers them the best quality help, recognizing that I am not the best quality help. And that was me realizing that if they tell me that they're suicidal, I am not qualified.
Right.
I am not qualified to help him through that. And I have to call 911. And I'll tell you what, so for anyone who's dealing with a toxic relationship, an abusive relationship, and they're dealing with this and they're getting those threats of suicide, whether it's serious or not, for me personally, the moment I started calling for professional help when he gave me those threats, was when he stopped giving me those threats.
Mhm.
Because
Yeah, and look, yeah, and
Real
ahead, go
quick,
ahead.
guys, we're gonna have to start wrapping it up because we're getting to the end. So,
God,
I
we
do
could
wanna
really
say-
do this for 4 fucking hours, can't
I
we?
know, that's why we
Really
gotta
do
stop.
this.
And we've got to save HPD, histrionic personality disorder, and narcissistic personality disorder for next time. And then we're going to just be off and running with narcissistic personality disorder. I can guarantee you that. But I do want to say, like, I had a couple that was by borderline, and once a week, one or the other would be calling me suicidal. So, borderline personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder doesn't usually use suicidal that much, but borderline, yeah, unfortunately, yeah. And it's got to be taken seriously. Then I think borderline, out of all of them, are the ones that can, with a lot of work,
Yeah,
be the most stable. They can be extremely unstable, but
Yeah.
they're the ones I think that are recognize their distress.
right. And they have a chance because they will have contact with mental health more than the other 3.
Yeah.
The other 3 will never, they will not come to me or Jody and be like, oh my God, help me, unless it's for something other than a personality disorder. Borderline.
Show you that my ex is a psycho. That's why they come.
Let me manipulate you into making me look really good for the court system so I don't have to do too much prison time. That's why they come to me. If I come to you, it'll look good for the courts. I'm like, that's when I roll my eyes.
So on that note, ladies, any last wrap up? Oh, suddenly it got really quiet.
If we gotta if we don't shut up, Mercury will throw us into some other fucking thing. So I'm just gonna.
Okay, Ashley, any last wrap up?
no, I mean, stay tuned because, you know, the further we dive deep into understanding the personality disorders, making it make sense, the easier it is for us to be able to establish boundaries for ourselves and to be able to identify these types of things in other people in order to keep ourselves safe, in order to have healthy relationships, and ultimately be able to live happy lives that, like Jody said, thriving in our narc-free lives, thriving in our toxic relationship-free lives. And so that's the journey we're on, is to be able to break these things down, make them make sense, and create a beautiful lives for ourselves where we are no longer dealing with these types of toxic relationships. The more we know, the better we can protect ourselves.
Yay.
And
Well said.
I just want to say that we are just giving brief overviews, scratching the surface. We're not doing deep dives into each personality disorder as deep as we can go. We're trying to give you information that you can kind of utilize, but this is not meant for Mercury, fuck you, for diagnostic purposes. This is just kind of giving you brief overviews to each of the different personality disorder.
Personality, yeah.
Okay. Because you know, listening to this, you might say, well, what about this? What about that? Or how come you said this and not that? This is just informational to give you enough information to know, one, what we're talking about and have an idea of the different personality disorders. I think we're going to dive deeper into narcissistic personality disorder because we have some fun stories about that. But other than that, yeah, we're all experts in that shit. So other than that,
take care of yourselves. That's what matters.
Exactly. We're just trying to make it make sense.
Makes
So
sense.
we made it make a little bit more sense.
Yes.
On our job.
Yes.
Cheers, ladies.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.